Welcome to the Deep Dive. We pull the most profound insights from dense source material to give you the context and clarity you need. Today, we are tackling something pretty monumental. We're wrestling with F.W.J. Schelling's really audacious philosophical vision, specifically what he calls the conspiracy of life.
It's definitely audacious, and our sources show a project that really dares to, well, fundamentally reverse a lot of our basic assumptions about truth, about goodness, and even the structure of reality itself.
Yeah, it feels like a fundamental shakeup.
It is. And this isn't just a historical deep dive, It's a deep dive into how we understand reality. Schelling is trying to speak to a kind of life, a life force maybe, that pulses through everything, way beyond our usual boxes of living things and dead things.
Right, breaking down that binary.
Exactly. So for you listening, this is going to be a pretty radical intellectual workout. It's designed to challenge those ingrained ways of thinking.
And the starting point, you mentioned, it's very visual. The sources bring up Ellen Lowell's painting, Dark Room. It's striking.
It really is.
You see this, vibrant, muscled dog right next to a slab of mutton hanging on a hook. Seems pretty clear-cut. Life versus, well, former life, dead meat.
That's the immediate read, yes. But Schelling wants us to look much, much closer.
Deeper than the surface contrast.
Precisely. If you really look at that painting, or honestly, if you look closely at anything, the insight is that everything, the dark background, the wood grain, the very air in the room, it all sort of sparkles with vitality.
Sparkles, that's an interesting word for it.
It captures something, doesn't it? Nothing is truly inert, truly dead in an absolute sense. And this gets us past that simplistic illusion living versus dead. Schelling's mission partly was about revitalizing philosophy itself. He wanted to show that thinkers like Spinoza.
Spinoza, who got labeled a dead dog, right?
Exactly, labeled a dead dog by his contemporaries for being supposedly fatalistic or atheistic. Schelling insisted figures like that still possess this profound vital force. Their ideas aren't dead artifacts.
Okay, so this focus on an underlying vital force, this sparkling quality.
Yeah.
That leads us straight to the core concept for today, doesn't it? Introduced in Schelling's big 1809 freedom essay, conspiration.
Conspiration, yes.
I found the root of that word fascinating. Conspero in Latin. Literally, to breathe or blow together.
And it's so much more than just a concept for him. It's like the mechanism of reality itself, the secret rhythm of the cosmos. Conspiration defines life as this continuous, simultaneous, dual process.
Dual process. Okay,
Yeah.
What are the two sides?
Expiration and inspiration. Think of it maybe like breathing, but on a cosmic scale. Expiration is the breathing out. It's the dark abyss of nature, the ground breathing out into specific forms. It's the drive for that original sort of chaotic potential to become actual discrete things we can see and touch.
Right, the world taking shape.
Exactly. But then simultaneously, there's inspiration.
The breathing in,
Yeah.
the counterforce.
Yes, the necessary inhaling of this ground. It's the retraction. Those very forms that were breathed out are now drawn back, away from their specific isolated selves, towards the universal source they came from.
So everything is constantly doing both, being pushed out into form and pulled back to the source.
Constantly. Every single entity, this perpetual push and pull, this dual tension, is the conspiracy of life. It's life that exists beyond our neat categories of life and death, but also within them. It's what keeps the entire system dynamic, vital, alive.
A cosmic breath keeping everything in balance. So it's built on this perpetual tension. But what happens then if something, say, a person, or maybe even an idea, falls out of that rhythm? If the breathing gets out of sync?
That's the crucial question. If something falls out of this conspiracy, it stops. Well, it stops breathing together with the whole harmoniously. Schelling describes the result as sickness or fever.
Sickness or fever.
The entity becomes, in his words, inflamed by an inner heat. It turns its energy inward, but in a destructive way. It disrupts the balance. And this failure to maintain that essential struggle, the tension between the dark ground of nature and the light of form, that's what opens the door to sickness, and ultimately, as we'll see, to evil.
Wow. Okay. That's a really powerful setup. And it seems to lead us directly into the most radical claim, the one that structures this whole thing. The primacy of the good over the true.
Yes, the big reversal.
We're so used to thinking knowledge, the search for truth with a capital T, comes first. But Schelling just flips that entire equation on its head.
He absolutely does. And it's really important to note, this was long before thinkers like Levinas in the 20th century started talking about ethics, this first philosophy. Schelling was already right there.
Way ahead of his time.
His claim is that the question of the good is fundamentally superior to the question of the true. If we really want to understand the universe, we have to start with the moral drive, the good that organizes it.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Following our outline, if we dive into this primacy of the good, what does it actually mean for ethics to be first philosophy? Schelling suggests, especially in the system fragment, that all of metaphysics will eventually just fall under moral philosophy. Moral felt, he says. If ethics dictates metaphysics, what does that actually do to our idea of truth?
Well, it implies a really radical rethink, especially coming out of the Enlightenment. It basically means that all truly true ideas are, at the root, ethical statements.
Ethical statements. How so? We usually think of truth as objective, right? Like corresponding to reality, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. That's the standard view. But Schelling says no. Think about it. Why do we even desire the true? Why does it become a desideratum, something we actively want?
Because it's useful. Because it helps us navigate the world.
Maybe. But Schelling goes deeper. He says we only desire the true because its goodness as such has already announced itself. The very act of seeking truth is motivated by a sense that it's good to do so.
Wait, help me get my head around that. How can the desire for truth only happen because it's already good? That sounds, well, circular to a rational mind.
It does feel a bit circular, doesn't it? But think.
Yeah.
If you discover some factual truth that has absolutely no value, no goodness, no relevance to anything, what do?
You ignore it, I guess. It's just noise.
Right. You discard it. We engage in the often difficult, grueling pursuit of knowledge because we value the act of knowing itself. We value the true only because it is good to value it, because pursuing it contributes to the movement of life, to that conspiracy we talked about. The goodness of the quest comes before the specific knowledge you gain. It's fundamentally a project driven by a kind of moral commitment, not just neutral logic.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see this inherent drive, this sort of pre-rational commitment. It sounds a lot like how we appreciate art or beauty, something that moves us without a clear, practical reason. Which brings us right to Kant, doesn't it? And aesthetics.
Absolutely. Perfect connection. Kant's idea of reflective judgment is key here. He defined aesthetic pleasure as something that moves us without a prior interest or goal. We find pleasure in the grace, the gunst of something beautiful, precisely because it seems to show the non-purposive play of the purposive. Meaning the delight isn't just in the pleasing form itself, but in how that form seems to express an underlying, ungraspable freedom. Beauty, for Kant, and even more for Schelling, is like an intuitive glimpse of this freedom at the heart of things.
And this framework beauty, linked to freedom and spontaneity, gives Schelling a powerful way to critique things he saw as, well, unfree, like kitsch.
Oh, definitely. The rejection of kitsch becomes almost a moral duty for him, an assault on manufactured, unfree taste. The sources give that great example.
The Disney World birds.
Yeah. Imagine you're walking in what seems like a natural forest, maybe at Disney World in Orlando, and you're just delighting in these spontaneous bird songs. Beautiful, right?
Sure.
Then you find out the sound is just being piped in mechanically through hidden speakers. What happens to your pleasure?
It vanishes. Instantly. It becomes irritation. Annoyance, even.
Exactly. But why? The sound itself hasn't changed.
Because
Yes.
it's fake. It's not real.
It's a denial of freedom. That's the core of it for Schelling. Your initial pleasure was grounded in the idea of spontaneous, sovereign nature expressing itself freely. Kitsch is mechanized beauty. It pretends to be free, but isn't. It denies the wild, incomprehensible forces like the constant presence of death or that chaotic ungrund, the abyss that actually give rise to genuine form and beauty. It's an easy manufactured pleasure that betrays the good, the true source.
So that ungrund, that chaotic non-grounding ground we mentioned earlier, is actually essential for real beauty. It can't be smoothed over.
It absolutely cannot. And this ties into that other anecdote, the one about the Sumatran pepper patch.
Right, where you find unexpected order in the middle of jungle chaos.
Correct. William Marsden observed this neat, orderly pepper patch amidst the jungle's wild and opulent profusion. He thought the pleasure came just from the orderliness itself.
But Kant and Schelling disagreed.
They did. They argued the delight comes specifically from the surprise of finding that patch of order within nature's extravagance, its sheer, untamed prodigality. If that pepper patch existed all by itself in a neat, controlled environment, eventually it would just be boring, aesthetically dead.
So its beauty depends entirely on the contrast, on its connection to the wildness it came from.
Precisely. Its value, its delight, is totally contingent on its relationship to the vast, unpredictable, even violent being that produced it. True beauty, for Schelling, must contain that tension, that hint of the wild, the ungrund.
Which means the highest philosophical act, the place where it all comes together, must be the aesthetic act, where the true and the good finally stop being separate concepts and just merge.
Exactly. It culminates in that beautiful phrase, only in beauty are truth and goodness of the same flesh. Or Verschwistert, like siblings.
Siblings. Distinct, but from the same source, inseparable.
Yes. Beauty brings together the ground of the true, what Schelling sometimes calls the indivisible remainder of knowledge, the part that reason grasps with the good, understood as the ungrund, that non-grounding ground, the ultimate source. That's why he concludes the philosophy of spirit is an aesthetic philosophy. And poesy, art, poetry, creation in the broadest sense becomes the real teacher of humanity. It's the only place where that conspiracy of life is fully consciously realized.
Okay, so if beauty represents this ideal unity of true and good, we have to confront the messy reality, the human condition, specifically human freedom. The sources describe our situation as a really profound contradiction, an antinomy.
It's absolutely central.
On one hand, we're told we're utterly free, part of this great ocean of the good. But on the other hand, just existing as specific individual humans seems to inevitably involve some kind of betrayal, a falling out of that universal goodness. How does that work?
That is the core ethical puzzle for Schelling. And his answer is pretty startling. He basically says human freedom is unique precisely because it's the faculty for good and evil. It's not just freedom for the good.
The capacity for both.
Yes. He gives it these formal names, the Zertrennlichkeit der Prinzipien, which means the divisibility of principles, or the Scheidung der Kräfte, which we can translate as the scission or the separation of forces.
The scission, okay.
The idea is that the unity of forces, light and dark, expansion and contraction, which is absolutely inseparable in God, must be separable in the creature, in us, for genuine freedom to even exist. If we couldn't separate them, we'd just be puppets of the divine unity.
So freedom requires the possibility of breaking that unity. How does that separation, that scission, actually happen in us? Where's the moment of the fall, so to speak?
Well, Schelling clarifies this by contrasting humans with animals. Animals, he says, live in a kind of unbroken unity with the good, with the flow of life. Why?
Because they don't think about it.
Essentially, yes. They lack the reflective self-consciousness, the Verstand or understanding, that allows us to believe we understand ourselves as distinct, separate entities cut off from the whole. Humans, uniquely, can use their intellect to pursue their own particular will, their conatus, their drive, to persist as individuals against the universal will.
So the fall isn't about eating an apple. It's a cognitive act, a willful choice to prioritize me over everything.
Precisely. The human fall is the active sundering of those life forces. It's the elevation of the ego, the birth of Eigenheit selfhood, particularity, the desire for self-preservation that tries to detach itself from the universal current.
But there's a paradox here too, right?
A huge one. The result is that the human being becomes the place where nature can, strangely, come to know its own vastness, its own underlying animality. We become, in a sense, the conscience of nature, Mitwissenschaft, he calls it. We stand right at the center of this cosmic tear, this scission.
Standing at the tear? That sounds incredibly unstable. Experiencing that kind of radical freedom must create enormous pressure.
It absolutely does. And that pressure, that instability, is experienced internally as anxiety.
Angst.
Yeah.
The famous existential dread.
Yes, but specifically linked here to freedom. The creaturely will, the Eigenheit or selfhood, is fundamentally a reaction against the pull of the universal good. The good, that absolute center pulling everything back through inspiration, is described almost like an ego-consuming fire.
A fire? That sounds terrifying.
It is from the perspective of the separate ego. The specific creaturely will shuns this abyss. It fears being annihilated, dissolved back into the infinite unity. It wants to preserve itself.
The sources use those really vivid analogies to get this feeling across, like the dizziness you feel standing on a high cliff edge.
Right, where there's that secret, terrifying voice whispering, "Jump!"
Or the irresistible song of the sirens, luring sailors to their doom.
Those perfectly capture the birth of evil, or at least the potential for evil, from this anxiety. That dizziness, that angst, is the creaturely will fleeing the pull of the good. It's born from what Schelling calls a divine disequilibrium, Ungleichheit, the inherent instability that allows for differentiation. The anxiety is so intense, so vertiginous, because the creature literally doesn't know whether it wants to live as a separate self or die by returning to the whole, whether to move towards the light of form or sink back into the dark ground. It's driven out of the center by the anxiety of life itself, or maybe the anxiety of being consumed by the good.
Okay, so if the good is this consuming fire and freedom is this volatile decision, how on earth do we live an ethical life? How do we avoid just collapsing into fear or pure self-interest? This seems to lead Schelling away from traditional moral philosophy, especially the idea of a neutral free will making rational choices.
He completely rejects that. He dismisses the idea of equilibrium arbitria, the balanced, calculating moral will, weighing options as the plague of morality.
Or plague of morality. Strong words.
He argues that if you have to stop and deliberate, should I be ethical here? You've already failed. You've already detached yourself, placed yourself on the periphery, treating the good as some external rule or obligation you might choose to follow or not.
So if it's not about rational choice or following rules,
Right.
what's the alternative for Schelling? How do we act ethically?
The alternative is Gewissenhaftigkeit. It's usually translated as conscientiousness, but the German word is richer. It retains the root Wissen, meaning knowledge.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
So ethical action is a kind of knowing.
Yes. It's not just following a duty, like Kant's deontology, but acting in a way that is inherently aligned with the good, because you know it immediately as the right way. This ethical action isn't really a matter of choice in the usual sense, but of recognition, a direct insight.
But doesn't that seem to remove human agency, at least in the way Kant thought about it? If it's recognition, not choice, what's the will doing?
It shifts the focus. It becomes an act of profound trust, Zutrauen, and confidence. Zuversicht in the divine structure of reality, a structure that, when truly grasped, actually excludes all choice.
Excludes choice. That sounds almost
No.
dysfunctional.
It's more like the choice has already been made by reality itself, and the ethical act is simply aligning with it. This is that granite resolve Schelling admired. It's a position closer to the Stoic ideal of Cato, or maybe even the Buddhist path of Bodhisattva, where the ego falls away. You act ethically because, from that perspective, you could not have acted otherwise. The highest freedom, paradoxically, manifests as a kind of necessity, because the particular self, the Eigenheit, dissolves, and the action flows directly from the universal will.
Okay, this demand for recognition, for this kind of deep knowing over rational choice, it puts Schelling in direct conversation, maybe even confrontation, with the limits of reason itself. Especially thinking about the context post-Hegel's phenomenology. Hegel seemed to offer a system where reason could grasp everything.
Exactly. Schelling had to grapple with that. He saw the power, the necessity even, of dialectical thinking as a starting point. But he absolutely insisted that philosophy cannot and must not end there.
Why not? What's the danger?
The danger is believing that philosophy can be wrapped up, finalized into actual knowledge through a completed dialectic. For Schelling, that risks killing the very thing he's interested in. If the dialectic produces a final, static result, that result represents a clotting of the conspiracy of life.
A clotting, like it stops the blood flow, it stops the breath.
Precisely. It stops the movement, the conspiration, the dynamic inhaling and exhaling. It freezes life into a concept. Schelling insisted there has to be something other and something more than mere reason, something that constantly strives beyond reason's boundaries, the Hinausstrebens, the striving beyond. Pure reason, if it thinks it has all the answers, creates a static system that just can't account for the sheer dynamism of freedom in life.
This critique of reason sounds very much like the anxiety swirling around the big intellectual crisis of that time. The pantheism controversy involving Spinoza, driven by Jacobi.
Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, yes, he really crystallized the fear of where rationalism might lead. He argued quite powerfully that if reason consistently follows its own logical geometric rules, it inevitably ends up at Spinozism, which for Jacobi and many others meant a universe of rigid necessity, pure fatalism, and ultimately nihilism. If reason is the only path to truth and reason can't get outside itself, well, you eventually arrive at nothing but nothingness. Pure understanding, left to itself, only understands its own limitations, its own emptiness.
That fear resonates even today, doesn't it? Thinking about ideology.
Yeah.
The system that claims to explain everything, from one single premise, locking out any exceptions. It sounds like what Hannah Arendt later described as the logic of totalitarianism. Jacobi feared reason itself could become this kind of intellectual iron cage.
That's a great connection. And Jacobi's response, his so-called unphilosophy, was basically to say, okay, reason leads to disaster, so we need a A leap into faith, into feeling, into sentimental fideism, or even Schwarmerai, which is like fanatical mysticism or enthusiasm.
But Schelling wasn't buying that leap.
Not at all. Schelling, this granite philosopher, needed something that could engage with the weight, the substance of the world. He dismissed Jacobi's alternative as slack ecstasy. He couldn't just abandon reason or Spinoza. He needed to save Spinoza from the charge of being a fatalist, an atheist.
So rather than reject Spinoza the maledictus, the cursed one, Schelling attempts this radical rereading, this revitalization. How did he do it?
Yeah.
How did he defend Spinoza from the standard attack that his system just meant God equals things, pure pantheism?
He went right after the core assumption of the critics, what he saw as the dogmatic reading of Spinoza. Their mistake, Schelling claimed, was treating Spinoza's substance, or God, as if it were just another object out there, an objective non-I. If the absolute is just an external object that reason can analyze, then yes, the system probably does become deterministic.
But Schelling said the absolute isn't an object.
No. It's not something you can pin down with ordinary understanding. The absolute, in its dynamic infinity, is only present, only accessible through what Schelling calls intellectual intuition. We'll need to unpack that term later, but the key point here is it's not graspable by standard logic alone.
Okay, and this leads to a really subtle point about language, about logic.
Mm-hmm.
The role of the copula, the word is. How did he use the grammar of a statement like God is nature to keep God and nature distinct, even while relating them?
This is brilliant, actually, really subtle. When we say God is nature, Schelling argues the is does not mean simple identity. If God and nature were totally identical, they'd be einerlei, just the same thing, and the statement would be meaningless, a tautology.
Like saying A is A.
Exactly. Schelling insists God and nature are, in a way, opposites, infinite versus finite, substance versus mode. But they are held together by that crucial third term, the copula is, which maintains their relationship while preserving their difference.
Could you give us another example to make that clear?
Think about the sentence. The body is blue. The concept body, the substance of the body, doesn't inherently contain blueness. Blueness is contingent quality, a third thing brought into relation with the body by the is. Similarly, God is the infinite dynamic substance, and nature is a finite expression or mode of that substance. The is links them but doesn't collapse them into each other. Substance implicates itself in the modes, and the modes explicate the substance.
That language, implicate, explicate, sounds very close to Deleuze's later reading of Spinoza, his idea of expressionism, the fold, the ply.
It's remarkably close. Deleuze definitely picked up on this strand. Expressionism avoids making God just equal the sum of things, crude pantheism, but also avoids making God totally separate and transcendent, traditional theism. The one, the substance, folds itself into being, gives rise to the many, A1, A2, A3 as Deleuze might put it, but remains the dynamic source. This move was crucial for Schelling to reclaim Spinoza not as a dead dogmatist, but as a philosopher of the vital conspiracy of life.
Okay, so Schelling has rescued Spinoza and established this dynamic view. How does this stand up against Kant's solution to the pantheism controversy? Kant's idea of Vernunftglaube, rational faith.
Right. Kant famously tried to solve the problem by, as he put it, denying knowledge to make room for faith. He argued that reason, particularly practical reason, must assume God exists. It's a postulate of reason.
Why must it assume God?
To satisfy the absolute demand of the moral law. For Kant, morality needs the idea of God, and immortality, freedom, to make ultimate sense, to guarantee that striving for the highest good isn't futile. So reason kind of legislates belief where it can't provide proof.
But Schelling wasn't impressed by this rational faith. He saw it as weak.
He saw it as born of desperation or paucity, yes. He felt that resorting to belief simply because morality seems to require it misses the point. Kant's God feels like a necessary hypothesis tacked on at the end.
Whereas Schelling's God.
Schelling's vision, grounded in that Gewissenhaftigkeit, that conscientious knowing, aims for the highest unity of knowing and acting. True religion, true connection to the divine, isn't a Vernunftglaube, a rational belief needed to prop up morality. It's a direct participation in the divine life, accessible through something like intellectual intuition. As Heinrich Heine quipped about Kant, he killed God with theoretical reason only to resurrect him with the magic wand of practical reason. Schelling wanted a God who was intrinsically woven into the fabric of thought and being, not just a moral necessity.
Which brings us back again to the aesthetic. If reason has its limits and moral faith feels insufficient, then maybe the supreme act isn't purely rational or purely moral, but aesthetic. You mentioned the world itself as a work of art, the Weltwerk.
Yes, the world work. For Schelling, the world isn't a machine built from a blueprint. It's continuously produced, continuously created in the free, dynamic, maybe even discontinuous divine imagination.
The divine imagination, not divine reason.
It's imagination, because it's about creation, novelty, freedom. This productive imagination is the very life of the Weltseele, the world soul or world anima. It's what unites raw sensation, sin, with understanding. He describes it beautifully as sense that is conscious of its infinity.
Sense conscious of its infinity, wow.
So nature itself is the ultimate artist, the demiurge, the creator, but it creates out of its own unfathomable, unstructured depth, the couvre, that space of pure potential, not from some external set of rules or plans.
Nature as self-creating, constantly improvising out of its own wildness. That must has huge implications for ethics, too, especially for conventional morality. Sittlichkeit.
It blows it up, really. It completely rejects the idea that you need to acquire goodness, as if it's something external you lack. If the world is constantly self-creating good, then goodness isn't something you earn. It already has you.
So ethical life isn't about following rules to become good.
It's about disengaging from the things that block that inherent goodness, getting rid of the inhibitions, the self-protective clots of the ego that stop you from affirming the good that's already flowing through you and everything else. Rigid moral codes, Sittlichkeit, are ultimately rejected because the sheer freedom of nature always overflows and exceeds her own laws or patterns.
Okay, if goodness isn't acquired through rules, and the source is this sublime, non-conceptual, self-creating freedom, how do we actually access it? How do we get a glimpse of this?
Through intellectual intuition. Now, this term is tricky. Nietzsche famously mocked it as the Schelling swindle, suggesting Schelling just invented a faculty to sneak God back in.
Right, like a magic insight button.
But that's not really fair to Schelling. Intellectual intuition for him isn't some mystical vision providing secret knowledge, nor is it just piety. It's more like an intimation, an Ahnung, a hint or presentiment of the abyss of freedom that underlies everything.
An intimation of the abyss.
Yes. It's that moment when the solid, fixed presence of the world is suddenly interrupted by what is not there, by the dark precursor, the on the not being that is paradoxically the source of being. It's a glimpse of the ungrund.
That sounds less like mystical vision and more like the spark of creative genius or scientific discovery, that moment of insight.
Very much so. It demands what Schelling called Nachempfinden. It's a difficult word, maybe post-invention or creation or homogeneous genius. It's the ability not just to understand a discovery logically, but to grasp its innermost spirit, to relive the creative act that produced it. This challenges the ordinary Verstandesmensch, the person stuck in logical understanding who can only analyze what's already laid out. Intellectual intuition is about recognizing the ungrund within the created world.
And if the ordinary understanding, the Verstandesmensch, can't handle contradiction, which is the very heart of this scission, this tension between light and dark, freedom and necessity, then tragedy must be the art form that really speaks to this condition.
Tragedy becomes the highest form of art for Schelling, precisely because it stages the profound contradiction that rational understanding tries to smooth over. It confronts us with the brutal struggle between freedom and necessity.
Like the Prometheus story.
Prometheus is a perfect archetype. The hero affirms his freedom by struggling against overwhelming necessity, against fate. And even though he goes under, even though he's destroyed, his struggle and his explanation of free will proves freedom through its very loss. It's an honor paid to freedom by showing its tragic power even in defeat.
Or Oedipus, the ultimate tragic paradox.
Exactly. Punished for a crime that fate determined he would commit, yet his suffering is seen as honorable because he struggled against that fate, trying to assert his freedom. His punishment paradoxically affirms the significance of human freedom.
This tragic struggle brings us back to the question of evil. If freedom is this divisible principle, this scission, how does evil arise from it?
Evil, for Schelling, isn't some independent Dirk force. It's a distortion within the dynamic of freedom itself. It's a movement he calls Verkehrtkeit, perversity, malice, a turning against. It's where freedom unleashes itself against itself.
Freedom hating itself.
In a way, yes. It's the dark ground of freedom expressing itself as Verderbtheit, corruption, putrefaction, which happens when the particular creaturely will, that self-preserving conatus or ego, completely severs itself from the universal source of life. From the good, it tries to be absolute on its own.
And this isolated, fever self just swelling up leads to that dramatic phrase you mentioned earlier, the orgasm of forces.
It's a shocking image, isn't it? But it captures the destructive endpoint of pure self-preservation that refuses connection. If the isolated energy of the ego isn't integrated back into the whole, if it just keeps building, the organ, the self, swells up and finally explodes in a frenzy of excitement. It's a destructive return of the center, but in a distorted way, like Dionysus breaking through without any Apollonian form or measure. It's the self-hatred of freedom consuming itself. Jean-Luc Nancy had a great phrase for this, calling evil stillborn good. It had the potential for creation, but it turned inward and aborted into destruction.
And sickness, too, that isn't just a lack of health in this view.
No. Following thinkers like Kengelhem later, pathology isn't simply anti-life, it's revealingly another way of life. Yeah. Sickness, what Schelling might call unwesen, a semblance of life and unnature, actually reveals the lost origin, the nature of health itself. Health, in this framework, is defined as the love of decision, the ability to hold that tension between light and dark, expansion and contraction without collapsing. You only truly appreciate health when you see its distortion and sickness. The soul of all hate, he suggests, is ultimately a distorted love.
So the ultimate goal isn't necessarily happiness or avoiding pain.
No. The ultimate goal is the joyous, even if tragic, affirmation of decision itself. The crisis, the tension, is life.
That embrace of the whole cycle.
Yeah.
It sounds deeply spiritual, almost Eastern in its feel.
It really does resonate strongly with, for instance, the Indian philosophical tradition, particularly the Bhagavad Gita. The highest affirmation there is loving the whole cosmic dance, the wheel of Brahma, creation, Shiva, destruction, and Vishnu, preservation. Loving it all through bhakti, pure devotion, pure love for the totality.
And freedom, in that ultimate sense.
Freedom becomes the Purushottama, the supreme person in the Gita, which isn't separate from the forces, but is the very belonging together of the three fundamental qualities or potencies, the gunas.
So unity isn't static bliss, but embracing the interplay.
Exactly. That unity allows the calm soul, the witness, to observe all the action, the creation, the destruction, without being swept away or consumed by it. To love the wheel isn't about escaping the cycle of birth and death, but being free for the wheel, recognizing the divine presence not just in peaceful repose, but in the most violent, active moments too. It's the final, deepest acceptance of the conspiracy of life.
This whole intense philosophical journey, digging down to the very ground of being, it seems to force us at the end to confront the silence. Silence of the past, maybe. If nature is constantly breathing in and out, how do we hear the dead? How do we connect with that abyss of the past that's always informing the present?
That's a profound closing question. The past, for Schelling, is that abyssal ground of nature. It's always already dead in the sense of being non-present, yet it's eternally returning, shaping the future past that haunts us. The ghost of the past is always intruding on what he calls the defenseless present.
And that intrusion creates the anxiety.
It's a major source of angst, yes. That anxiety stems from our inability to decide whether to fully embrace the conspiracy of life, go all in, affirm the tension, or to pull back, collapse into one side or the other, try to escape the ambiguity.
You mentioned Hölderlin earlier, criticizing the Germans for their Karch angst.
Their meager or barren anxiety. He felt the typical Verstandesmensch, the person of understanding, avoids confronting the true abyss by just getting lost in everyday routines in their job, distracting themselves.
Which is a kind of philosophical failure.
For Schelling, yes. The real philosopher has to grapple with the limits of language, with the inexpressible root that words can only point to. He has to recognize, like St. Paul suggested, that sometimes words are just mere sound. True insight might require returning to silence, to the Verstummen der Wissenschaft, the growing silent of knowledge. The silence of death, much like the good itself, demands words from us, but it never tells us if our words are adequate. It remains silent.
So the final answer to that ancient riddle of the Sphinx, what is the person, seems to emerge from this constant dynamic interplay.
The person is nature, and nature is time. Not time as an external container, but time coming into being within each thing through this process of conspiration.
And that's why Schelling used the image of the Sphinx pointing to the rotation of time as his insignia.
Exactly. It directs us, the listener, toward finding the constancy of inner love, finding blessed peace, not by stopping the world, but within the movement of the world, under the rotation of time. It's the ultimate affirmation of the cycle, the tragic tension, the cosmic breath.
It really feels like the core ethical demand here is just to fully love the crisis itself, to embrace decision.
I think that's right. So perhaps the final thought to leave you with is this. If anxiety is, at its root, the fear of being consumed by the good, the terror of the abyss, and if evil is just a tragic misstep, a stillborn good, then how does the conscious decision to embrace that very scission, that inescapable tension between the light of form and the dark ground of the ungrown, how does that become the uniquely human act of creation? That, I think, is the deep, maybe infinite task Schelling ultimately entrusts to us.